Good evening. Good evening and welcome to our Pulpit Plus Exchange for academic year 2025-2026. My name is Karen Ware-Joseph and I am the Chief Operations Officer for Iliff and the Program Director for Congregational Connections, of which Pulpit Plus Exchange is a part of that programming. And so tonight is a Pulpit Plus Exchange event that the series that we're entitling How We All Get Free. So how we all get free is a very important goal for us all to try to figure out, to try to struggle with, to try to wrestle with, right? And so when we say how we all get free, we mean all. So how many people invited someone this evening? Kay and Mary, and I don't know your name yet. Beverly, thank you. And Holly, you've invited someone as well, right? So yes, so this is what we want. So you have something in front of you on the table. I know it's a piece of paper, but if the piece of paper is actually utilized for you to put this on a bulletin board at your organization or at your church to try to get other people to come, then this will be well worth us using this piece of paper to get more people in. Because if you felt something last week, and I've heard from some of y'all to say, yeah, I did. You felt a sense of freedom. You felt a sense of hope. You felt a sense of encouragement. You got some strategies for moving forward in this complex world that we're in. And the world has always been complex, but we're in it now in a different kind of complexity, and we're looking for some answers and we're looking for that hope. So if you felt that, how much more do you want the rest of the people that you know in your family, in your communities, amongst your friends? You want them to experience that same sense of freedom. And so every speaker that we're bringing in, these are speakers that we know are going to be able to give you yet another nugget, another piece of insight for you to utilize as you continue to walk in this journey that we all call life. Now, many of you heard the names Sandra Bland, Michael Brown, Philando Castile, George Floyd, Tamir Rice. And these are all names associated with racial profiling and police brutality. But you may not have heard the names Rodney King, Latasha Harlins, Reginald Denny, or Edward Song Lee. These names are also associated with racial profiling and police brutality. They are uniquely, though, associated with the LA riots in the spring of 1992, resulting in the damage or destruction of more than 1,000 buildings and approximately 2,000 Korean-owned businesses. And more significantly is the loss of life that was associated with these riots. So we also know that from the LA riots that the African-American communities and the Korean communities were at odds with one another. What we may not know are the reasons why this took place. But this is important information for us to know so that we do not repeat history. That's why we learn things, is so that we can do better. If we know better, we can do better. And so the next guest that we're inviting after tonight's speaker is Paula Yu, an author, a former journalist, and also a LA resident who wrote a book about the LA riots. And writes about it in a way, though, that takes us into the narratives of some of the people whose names we may or may not have heard, but also gets us to the root of some of those stories. It gets us in a close encounter with each of them. And she's coming to speak to us. So yes, please invite people. I know tonight is going to be magnificent. So you're going to feel more freedom from tonight. But please invite people to come to the next speaker that's coming in this month, Paula Yu, to talk about the LA riots. Now, tonight's speaker. Oh, she can't see me looking at her, so I don't even know why I'm doing that. The Reverend Dr. Jamie Eaddy is a public theologian, thanatologist, grief counselor, an administrator with over 20 years of experience in transformative education, ministry, and community service. As a thanatologist and grief doula, Dr. Eaddy is dedicated to guiding individuals and communities through life's most challenging transitions, including grief, trauma, and loss. She is the founder and principal of Thoughtful Transitions, LLC, where she fosters a holistic approach to healing that integrates spiritual, emotional, and mental well-being. Through her work, she challenges oppressive death-dealing systems and creates nurturing spaces for individuals to process grief without stigma or shame. Her commitment to justice, liberation, and equity informs her work, which often meets at the intersection of faith, race, gender, sexual orientation, and social justice. Dr. Eaddy has consulted and provided transformative learning experiences for the Office for Victims of Crime, the Philadelphia Mayor's Office of Public Engagement, the Office for Black Male Engagement, and Philadelphia's Department of Behavioral Health and Intellectual Disability Services. She has supported the learning and development of social workers, therapists, law enforcement advocates, lawyers, etc. In addition to her role at Thoughtful Transitions, Dr. Eaddy serves as the Director of Counseling and Wellness Services and Grief Doula at the Anti-Violence Partnership of Philadelphia. Please join me in welcoming the Dr. J, as she likes to be called, before she speaks. And before she speaks, I'm also going to read our land acknowledgement. So take some of the space in your hearts and minds to ponder on these things. Iliff School of Theology, founded in 1892, acknowledges that the space in which we gather today is located in the ancestral home of the Arapaho, Cheyenne, and Ute peoples. The people closely associated with the founding of Iliff caused a devastation that we cannot undo or fully rectify. And our intertwined history makes us responsible for and to all Indigenous peoples in our continued occupation of this land. We now acknowledge the enduring relationships that these nations have to their homeland. We acknowledge that our occupancy has historically ignored the relational significance of this land and all of its peoples, both human and non-human. Through this acknowledgement, we pledge in our learning community to listen to, learn from, to amplify the wisdom of, and find opportunities to partner with the Arapaho, Cheyenne, and the Ute peoples. In addition to our land acknowledgement, we publicly affirm our commitment to the Lenape peoples, with whom we have entered into an ongoing process of accountability and building right relationships. The intertwined histories of Methodism and Euro-Christian conquest were exemplified by welcoming the gift of an 18th century book of Christian history, bound in the flayed and tanned skin of a murdered Lenape man, and publicly displayed at Iliff as a treasured artifact from 1893 until 1974. We seek to address this horrific legacy through attention and sustained effort to reshape Iliff's relationship with the Lenape and other Indigenous people in our teaching and communal life. We are profoundly grateful to the Lenape peoples for their willingness to engage with Iliff as we wrestle with this painful history and pledge to uphold this relationship in good faith. We pledge to be accountable to all Indigenous peoples and to build relationships grounded in justice, respect, and shared responsibility. Ashe. Dr. Eaddy.
Thank you. I'm sitting with the land acknowledgement, and I'm gonna do my best to not get in trouble tonight. Good evening, everyone. I wish I was there with you. I like being able to move about and get the energy in the room, but I'm trusting that it will come through well, although we are not in the same location. Thank you for reading that land acknowledgement and for naming the ways that you are supporting the people. One of my challenges with land acknowledgements, and I have, we're going to talk in a second. One of my challenges with land acknowledgements is that we acknowledge the harm, but we do not often work toward any kind of social, financial support for communities that we've harmed. So I love that you are talking about partnerships. So I just needed to say what I'm sitting with as this conversation starts. And I am here in Philadelphia, ancestral land of the Lenape people as well. And so thank you for naming that. And I get to see some of you in the room. So I'm looking at you, and I trust that you can hear me well. I'm going to share slides in a few minutes, and it's just about it's a few slides to help with the conversation. But I want to begin by sort of reframing a poem that we know, a poem called Harlem by Langston Hughes. And I'm not going to read that. I'm going to read something that's inspired by Harlem that will take us into our conversation tonight. What happens to grief unspoken? Does it get caught in the throat? Does it sit heavy in the chest? Or leak out in unrealized dreams and disease? Does it turn to rage or silence or lingering sadness or shame? Does it grow louder and louder each day? Does it find its way to live through the words of a song or a poem on the page? Or does it eventually forget its own name? And so as we talk about how we all get free, share my screen here. As we talk about how we all get free, I want to think about grief, memory, and the work of liberation in times of continuous loss. And as was part of the introduction, I'm a thanatologist, and that is this interdisciplinary study of death, dying, grief, and bereavement. So it's not just about someone taking their last breaths, but it's about how people and systems, how land, how everyone is interconnected in loss, change, transition, how we learn how to live and be with one another, how we learn how to find a sense of aliveness in ourselves again. And so I want to pause as we start to do a sacred space to honor grief. I'm not in a room, and so I haven't had a chance to, meet anyone personally or to ask you your story. But I suspect that everyone in the room is navigating some kind of loss. And when I say the room, I'm saying those of you that I can see on the screen. And then I know that there are several who've logged in through the webinar who are virtual with us. And so I want to pause for a second. And wherever you are, there might be some people or things or ideas that feel like losses that we want to name. And I'll get into why this naming is so important. But if we take just a few seconds, whether you say it out loud or you just acknowledge it in your own heart, I'll give you time to say the names of the people and or the things that have been ruptured that feel like losses, that are transitions. I do this in community because, one, I realize that many of us don't always have the space to tell someone else about the losses that we've experienced. And we are moving through life in isolation, sometimes in loneliness. And bell hooks and many others remind us, rarely, if ever, are any of us healed in isolation. Healing is an act of community, and so is naming. And so, just by the act of being able to name in community some of the losses that you have, that we have experienced, that is one of the things that puts us on, keeps us on this path to freedom, freedom and liberation. And so tonight, this thanatology lens, this thanatological perspective about where we are. You see the person on the screen and pieces missing, right? Parts of them gone. Some you still see in the wind. Some may have disappeared completely. And for many of us, that's what life feels like when we experience a loss. When mama dies, there feels like a piece of you. When pop dies, when your auntie or your uncle, when your close friend or your spouse or partner dies, it feels like a piece of you is missing. When your child dies, it feels like a piece of you is missing. But it's not only people. There are ideas and dreams and opportunities and mobility, ability. There are other losses that we experience that have us sort of moving through the world like the person on the screen, because we are grieving, because there was someone or something that was a part of us that is no longer there in the way it was previously, and we are grieving. And so some of you heard me talk about just a few things. I'm not going to stay here, but what is grief? Grief is an emotion. Just like you feel sadness, grief, while sadness might be a part of grief, grief is also its own emotion. It's this complex, multifaceted emotion, right? It's an emotion, but grief is also this process, not a linear process, not steps where if we do A and then B follows and then C follows and then we're on our, it's not quite like that. It's much more messy. And so part of freedom, part of being free in this world that seems to be hitting us with perpetual losses and changes and transitions, right? Part of being free, finding our freedom, finding our way to freedom is understanding the expansiveness of grief, that it is an emotion, but it is also this process which is our natural response. So y'all know I like to tell people to talk to people around them or write stuff down. It's a natural response. So for those of us who have felt like something was wrong with us because of how we have felt or responded during times of loss, I wanna hopefully this gives you a bit of freedom tonight. There's nothing wrong with you. There's nothing wrong with you. So grief, this natural response to loss, change, transition, unmet expectations, unrealized dreams, and shattered assumptions. I'm going to say that again for those who might be writing this down. Grief is our natural response to loss, change, transition, unmet expectations, unrealized dreams, and shattered assumptions. So part of being free in a world that continuously hits us with losses is recognizing, one, that the process is not an overnight process, and each of our timelines might be different, and it is not neat. It does not contain steps, but it is natural. We are okay, even though we might be grieving. And so what about this terrain that we're walking in and on today? What is the source, the cause of some of our losses? Now, we already know about the people in our lives, the people who are no longer here, people who were with you a month ago, but they're not with you now, people who have taken their last breaths. I understand that's part of the terrain we are walking on, right? But what about what's the other stuff that's happening? What else is in this landscape that we're navigating our way through? So one of the things is unstable job markets, right? I know a lot of, in particular, as a Black woman, I know a lot of Black women who have lost their jobs. In fact, I saw one on social media today. And I won't get too deep into that, but we know a lot of people who have a lack of job security. And what happens when you have a lack of job security? What else goes with that? Sometimes a lack of financial security, a lack of a sense of safety, right? I might feel unsafe if I'm not sure how I'm going to make ends meet. I might feel unsafe in the world when the job market is sending me continuous rejections, or I'm being threatened daily. Those of you who are in administration in various schools, you understand something about the daily threats. Many of you who work perhaps even in the government, you understand something about the daily threats to your security. And so we are navigating this unstable job market. Then this rising cost of healthcare, but not only the rising cost of healthcare, this way that because I no longer have a job, or maybe I have a job, but now it's part-time. There is this correlation. I'm unable to afford insurance the way I was before, or you have stripped me of my rights, and so I cannot be seen, or I'm afraid to seek medical attention. This is the terrain. Maybe not you specifically are navigating your way through, but I'm sure if you look far enough, you've read a story, perhaps even know someone who this is the life they are living. Inequities in access to care, again, not just the rising cost of healthcare, but the way that folks are treated or not treated based on race or class or other social determinants. This is the terrain. I'm just naming the terrain that we're all trying to navigate our way through. But I wonder if you might, if you're in a chat, I know you all can write it, but what else about this terrain? Political upheaval. That's the terrain. All of these things bring about this sense of loss, change, transition in our lives. The land around us, the world around us feels like it is being destroyed. It's unstable right before our very eyes. That your footing is not quite the same. I promise you all, we're going to get into some hopefulness. I promise, but I'm not going to keep us here, but it's part of being free is recognizing the realities that are around us. We don't want to practice spiritual bypassing or ignoring the very real danger and threat that others have to experience, even if I'm not the one who feels a particular threat. Part of being free is recognizing that if I'm not free, until we all get free, which is why I love your theme for this series. So think about, if you're writing anything down, I want you to think about the terrain that you are navigating. Talked about jobs, healthcare, disenfranchisement in the political system that seeks the erasure of so many groups of people, various identities, intersecting identities. But then there's you've had some death in your family. You've received a medical diagnosis. You've received word about your health, your relationship. There's some of you at work, you're navigating. How do I do my job safely when there are threats to my campus? I know several campuses who've had to close. I know you've heard this, right? Who've had to close or do what they call it, shelter in place, because we are afraid that violence will harm our students and our faculty and our staff and those who are on the campus. This is the terrain. This is the terrain, consistent loss. Moving through the world with consistent loss. And so as we think about what grief is, right? Y'all remember our natural response to loss, change, and transition. Y'all remember that expansive definition. There are some ways that grief shows up, right? Some might call it different types of grief, but it's just a way to understand how we experience loss. So I want you to think about where you are. Anticipatory grief, right? This is mourning before the loss. This is knowing a loss is coming or might be coming. Because one thing about grief is it is real or perceived. So even if the loss never comes, if I perceive, my body still responds in the same manner. So this anticipatory grief, this mourning that we are doing before the loss, that we know the other shoe is about to drop, right? Is that what you say? The shoe is about the other shoe is about to drop. And so think of families. This was what I love was named already, even in it, not my introduction, but for next week's speaker, right? Families bracing for another police killing, or perhaps daily fear of incarceration. Because we live in a society where people are being snatched out of schools, snatched out of stores and off the street, taken from their homes. Anticipatory grief is this feeling, I know it's coming. I'm always looking over my shoulder. I know it's coming because it happened to my neighbors last week. I know it's coming because I read the news reports. I see and hear what they're saying. I know it's coming. Then disenfranchised grief, grief that is denied legitimacy. You've heard us talk about Black Lives Matter, this conversation around our indigenous siblings who do not always get the space to name the wrongs that have taken place in their lives and community. Disenfranchised grief is basically somebody telling you, we don't want to hear your story. Your loss doesn't matter. How confining is it when one wakes up every day thinking that the loss is coming? How confining is it when one wakes up every day thinking, I better look over my shoulder. I can't go to work because they're snatching people from work. How confining is it to have a loss and not to be able to name it because everyone around you tells you that your loss doesn't matter? And then I'll look at compounded or layered or this cumulative grief. This repeated traumas, repeated losses that stack up with no time for recovery. It's like this. Can I tell you all, I hate doing laundry. I don't even really like cleaning. I just do it because it's something you have to do. That's how I feel about it. Like I have to do it. It's not enjoyable for me, right? But think about laundry. It's you're washing clothes, and my mother always said, fold the clothes up as soon as they come out the dryer. Wash, dry, fold. I don't do it. I wash, I dry, I throw them to the side. Then I wash and I dry, I throw them to the side. Y'all know what happens after you do a couple of loads of laundry and you have washed and dried and thrown them to the side? You have a stack of laundry waiting to be addressed. Now, while I'm adding some levity to it, that is what cumulative grief is. It is, I've had a loss and it's right here on the side. And before I get a chance to fold the clothing or address the loss, there's another loss on top of it. And before I get a chance to fold the clothing or address the loss, there's another loss on top of that. And eventually these losses continue to pile up and pile up. And for some that may have started, we started noticing this with COVID, with the early pandemic days. We really started noticing how losses were piling up and we did not have the space, the breath, the language to process and to move our way through state violence and poverty and health inequity. All of this, these losses, these ruptures, these disconnections that just keep piling up and piling up. And someone in your family has died, but you know that they are letting people go at your job and you're just waiting for the pink slip. And your best friend, you know, there's danger because you think they may be, ICE may come and round them up. And you're also thinking about violence on college campuses because your child just started their freshman year at this school. This way that these losses that we experience continue to pile up and pile up before we get a chance to do anything to address them, before I get a chance to sit with my own pain, another loss is there. And then there's this one here, assumptive grief. You see the world or the earth here with some cracks in it. I have some words on the screen around the definition. Assumptive grief is the grief that arises when the world we assumed would hold us shatters, breaks. It's the collapse of we took for granted these beliefs about the stability and the security of our lives. Now, I wonder how familiar that sounds or feels for you today, that we took for granted that the places where we live and work and worship and learn, we took for granted that they would be the way they were, that your children could read any book that the teacher assigned. You took for granted that you could leave the house and go to work and come back home, that your family took for granted that when you left the house in the morning, that you will come back home in the evening. We took for granted that we were all leaning toward a more just and equitable society. And those ideas, those assumptions were disrupted. Our worlds shattered. Feels confining when you're moving through the world and you've had these ideas about what just is, what loving is. Can I say this? What empathy is and why it's important. You were moving through the world thinking, well, this is a basic definition. This is a basic understanding, right? We all believe in compassion, right? We all believe in empathy, right? This is, you had this, what you thought were universal understandings about what it meant to be human together. Assumptive grief because something came, something happened, a policy was enacted, a rule was set forth, something came and it disrupted and it splintered and it fractured and it collapsed and it shattered our worlds. And all of these ways that we experience grief, it's still not just an emotional journey. Grief disrupts our memory, our focus. This is why some of us are at work or in school and we're trying to do the thing, but it's not coming to me like it used to. I can't seem to concentrate. If I can pause for a second just to think about our children who are living in the same world that we're living in. And we might have had other experiences and can name the disruptions, but guess what? Your children, the children in your community are also experiencing these same disruptions. And they're in these formative years where they're trying to learn and become, and what's happening? Maybe they're not doing as well in school now as they were before. And someone is telling you that there's a problem with the learning, but no, I don't know that that's the case. I believe in my research and my conversation that the trauma and grief that we are experiencing is disrupting the way we learn. And so not only us, but our children unable to focus, impacting our decision making. What about physically? It shows up in the body, headaches, fatigue, joint and muscle pain, relationships. Sometimes our roles shift in our relationships. Sometimes we withdraw from relationships, family connection. And in my work, Anti-Violence Partnership of Philadelphia, as was mentioned in the introduction, we support what we call co-survivors of homicide. And very, very heavy space to be in. But I still hold on to hope, and I'll tell you why as we move through, because I want to make sure we understand. I believe we can be free. That some of our relationships, when we experience traumatic loss, we don't know how to grieve in community together. And by community, I mean like maybe your immediate family, that small circle. We don't know how to grieve together. Our grieving has always been disrupted. Our language has been snatched. Our rituals and practices have been demonized. And so when I'm grieving and you're grieving, I don't honor or respect or understand yours. You don't honor or respect or understand mine. And it continues to fracture our relationships. Sometimes we grow apart. So your relationships can be impacted by grief. Emotionally, we know the feelings that we've had. I'm going to name one feeling that we don't often talk about, and that is relief. And I'm debating, y'all, on how, if I want to, forgive me, I'll use this example for relief. Maybe you have been a caregiver for someone with dementia, and the doctor told you 4 years ago that, gave you, say, a timeline, and you're still caring for them 4 years later, and you're tired. Your whole life has changed. You no longer, the friends you had, things have sort of shifted because you're unable to give and to be a part of those relationships. Maybe work has changed. Maybe you don't even work full time or where you used to work because of the amount of energy and time you have to dedicate to caring for this particular family member. And now this family member takes their last breath and you breathe a sigh of relief. Relief is one of those emotions, especially around death, that we don't like to talk about, but it's very real and it's common. So if you're a person who's felt relief, now here's another way relief shows up. In oppressed communities, where people have their foot on your neck, and you can think about your intersecting identities, right? This is not just me as Black woman. This is our Indigenous sibling. This is our queer and trans siblings. This is our justice impacted siblings. This is anyone who is trying to navigate their way through a system that does not value their humanity. Sometimes when one foot is lifted off your neck, whatever means that foot comes off your neck, you breathe a sigh of relief. So I want to name that as a common and even normalized part of moving through our grief process. Grief impacts us spiritually and then neurologically. Our stress hormones, right, released in the mind and the body, stress hormones, disrupting our sleep, intensifying our trauma response. And so when we have these experiences with loss, change, transition, unmet expectations, unrealized dreams, and shattered assumptions, it's not a small thing. And it can feel debilitating. You can begin to feel caged in. But there is hope. There is hope. This is why I do the work I do, because we've been disconnected from our language around grief. We've been disconnected from rituals around grief. We've been disconnected from a robust understanding of grief as companion and friend and not as enemy. So grieving as a liberative strategy. How do we get free? All of us, not just a select few. How we all get free? So first, naming as resistance. There's a psychology of naming. There's something that happens when you are able to name and acknowledge. And naming does not necessarily mean that you have to speak out loud. Naming is more about the honest recognition of where we are. This is why, I don't know how. I'm trying not to, y'all, can I tell you, I'm trying not to get in trouble in some places because I like getting invited back, but I'm also trying to say what needs to be said. Naming as resistance. This is why one of the goals is to keep you from learning, to keep information from you so that you are unable to see and to name what's happening around you. Some of this is if I can disrupt you by causing you to have loss after loss after loss, you won't have time to survey the landscape in order to name, in order to feel and to see, and in order to refuse erasure. When I can't name, when I can't acknowledge, I fall into this box of erasure. So naming is resistance. Being able to name the disruptions that you are experiencing in your home, in your school, in your places of worship, in your community, that is resistance. So grieving as a liberative strategy means I need to sort of, even if I'm shaking, stand firmly and name the disruption. Some of the disruptions are political. I need to stand firmly and name the disruption. Some of those political disruptions filter their way down into the academy. I need to be able to name the disruption. Naming is an act of resistance, and that is one of the ways that we experience freedom. And in processing as protest, grieving, because ultimately, I'm stuck. Ultimately, grief does this. The process of grief does this for us. It lets us know that although something, someone, ideas, people, circumstances have been disrupted, the process, I call grief the process of grieving helps us recognize that we have internally and communally what it takes to move beyond that point of loss and to reimagine a new future together. I hope y'all are with me. This is why I wanted to be. This is why I want to be in the room. I want to be able to. I want to see y'all and see your faces. And please keep me posted with time. Like I don't want to go over. I think we might do some Q&A. So processing helps you get space to name, to feel and acknowledge, but also it is that space where you start to dream again. When you allow yourself the space to process, that processing becomes protest. That processing is where you say, wait a minute, okay, if I don't slow down for a minute to really explore, examine, figure out what's happening in me, with me, around me, and I just keep mindlessly producing, I am not going to be well. And if I am not well, that means we are not well. And if I am not well and we are not well, that means we are not free. And if we all going to get free, we need space to process, where we will not be shamed, where we won't be stigmatized because of the loss that we've experienced. Processing requires you to pause for a minute. Pausing disrupts empire's demand for your production, sort of speedy production. Pausing and naming disrupts empire's demand for your silence. How we get free? How do we use grief as a liberative strategy? We start naming the injustice, because that's a loss in somebody's life. If it's a loss in somebody's life, then I'm experiencing that loss too. How do we use grief, our grief, as a liberative strategy? We pause to process, because we realize that even in our processing, it is a protest. Our processing says, I am not going to collude with what is causing me to be a pawn. I am not going to co-sign the disruption that you are causing throughout I'm going to pause and name it and see how it's impacting me and my community. Communal grieving. I don't need to do this by myself. The quote, one of the quotes when we started, rarely, if ever, does healing happen in isolation. Healing is a communal effort. So part of being free is recognizing that if I'm not free, we not free. And in order for me to be free, we get free together, which means there are some things we have to do as community. What community rituals do you enact when you experience a death in your community? And hear me, I don't just mean the deaths that the news reports and tells you this person died and we all ought to be sad about it. I'm talking about the Black trans women in your community. When they die, what community rituals of lament do you engage? I'm talking about when the mothers or the parents who are trying to navigate life with little to no income to feed themselves and their children. What community rituals do you have to lament what's happening in folks' lives that are not like you? What wailing do you engage? What lament, what memorials do you create? How do you put on blast what's happening in the world around you? Your processing individually is protest, but you must also do some of this in community. And then we talk about this idea of remembering. And remembering is not just a cognitive act, this sort of thinking back to what was whole and what that looks like. Remembering is looking around, exploring the landscape, gathering what we need, broken pieces sometimes. It's tapping into ancestral wisdom. And yeah, your ancestors, those who were on the side of justice, those who believed in love and liberation, they have some wisdom for you. Somebody's grandmother had a saying that you need to tap into right now. Remembering your connection to those who fought the same fight before you. These are some liberative strategies for how we get free. I want to make a few notes about these sort of strategies and recognize how, when I say empire or death-dealing systems, don't want you to be free. And so what do? One, they attack your places where you can learn. So we know that there are a lot of rules that have come down to our in our educational system. And in some schools, because they want to continue to be here, have said, okay, we'll do this, right? Let's be real, that many schools have said, all right, we're going to do this. Other schools are subversive. They sign, but they figure out a way to use new language in order to get the same ideas across. But the learning is under attack. If we are going to be free together, we got to start learning together. One of the things in my community is freedom schools. Freedom schools bring us together, particularly for the young folks in my community, but adults as well. And they learned their history. They learned what it meant to mobilize and resist. They learned about creators and artists and writers and educators. They learned their history. And in learning their history, that also helped their imagination for their future. They were shown that things were possible, and that helped them imagine that things are possible. They were shown, y'all see how learning works? Learning helps you see something is possible, and that helps your imagining that things are possible. And so we know that learning is under attack because people don't want you to be free. So in this grieving process, as we process our grief, we must also find ways to open community to learn together. How, not just learning the history, but also learning about what it means to lament together, not just learning history so that you can dream into a new future, but learning how grief feels in your body, not just learning the history, but learning what it means to be human together, not just learning the history, but learning how we ought to remain connected to the land. What are the trees saying to us? What does the grass and the dirt, the soil have to say? But learning is under attack because we know that if I can stop you from learning, I can stop you from imagining freedom. And so the remembering framework is what I do with my death doulas, my grief doulas, my pastoral care students, the chaplains that I teach or train through Sankofa under the leadership of Dr. Danny Bahuro. And whenever I'm with folks and we are really learning about what it means to have this holistic approach to navigating grief, but also reimagining liberation and grief as a portal to liberation, there are a couple things that I say we have to do. And tonight, these 5 things, commit to doing these 5 things. And I'm not saying you're going to go home and we're going to do all of them together, but we take 1 or 2 of these and say, I'm going to find a way to begin to embody this in my own life. I'm going to find a way in my conversations to invite others to embody this as well. We talked about some of these: recognition, naming the rupture. Do not have blinders on. Don't walk through this season, this rhythm that we are all navigating our way through. Don't go through with your eyes closed. Can I say this? Sometimes giving people your thoughts and prayers is moving through with your eyes closed. Thoughts and prayers. Now, I pray and I think about people. So I'm not saying that prayer is not important. I'm not saying that your thinking, right? Thinking and imagining is not important, but I am saying that we often give folks thoughts and prayers when we ought to be naming and protesting and processing and wailing in community together. So recognition, name the rupture. I need you to move with your eyes wide open. More than thoughts and prayers, name it. More than hoping, well, if we can just make it through 3 years. No, name it today. Name the rupture, name the losses, name the disruptions that individuals and communities face, and not just communities that look like you or communities that are near you. Look at the person that is opposite the table. If you are a heterosexual white male, look across the table to the Black trans woman. Be concerned and name the ruptures they experience. If you are a Christian, look across the table at the humanist or the atheist. Name the ruptures that they are experiencing. So name the rupture. Reflection is simply that pause, giving yourself time to really notice the landscape. Some of us are moving through so quickly, we are not noticing the landscape. We don't know that there was another school shooting. We don't know that they came and rounded up 400 workers from, or maybe it's a Ford. I want to say Ford, but it may not have been a Ford. It might have been it's another dealership. It's not Ford, I don't believe. But we keep our eyes closed and we don't notice that people are being snatched around us. Reflection is being intentional about the deep introspection enough to understand the personal and collective significance of these disruptions that people are experiencing. Reconnection. So many of us have been socialized not to feel. Now, that is a survival technique. I understand that, right? I get it. I understand that many have had to take feeling and put it to the side because they needed to live. And expressing sadness did not support their living in that moment. What I want us to think about is how do we, I know great-grandmother or someone in the community modeled that for us, and I'm grateful. How do we show gratitude for what ancestors, what history did? Show gratitude because that's how we got here, and now say, that might not be the most helpful or healthy way for me to move through into my freedom. That part of my freedom is recognizing my wholeness as a human being, my full humanity, which includes my emotional landscape. So reconnection is, how are you feeling? And don't spiritual bypass the answer by telling me that you are too blessed to be stressed, or that you're blessed and highly favored. You could be blessed and incarcerated. That doesn't feel highly favored. Release, letting go of false promises, unrealistic expectations, toxic ideologies, and internalized oppression that hinders our ability to grieve. And what are some of these things? Some of these things are those cliches that many of us learned in our faith spaces. Things like God won't give us more than we can bear. Things like God needed them more than you do. What? God, you need them more than I do? That feels kind of strange for me, that you need my grandmother more than I needed my grandmother. You need to get God, you need to figure something else out if this is what we're working with. These sayings that we learn or hear in our church, that, you know, things about God needing a flower in God's garden. Well, it's a whole lot of flowers in the world. If you telling me you had to take my uncle because you needed a flower, God, we need to talk. What are these sort of toxic, the idea that if you show sadness, that there's somehow a question about how faithful you are, your faith, because you ought to just be sitting in victory. Don't you know the Lord loves you? I hear you, and I'm sad. So what have we learned about what it means to be fully human? In our faith spaces, how do we keep people from experiencing the fullness of their humanity? How do we really use spiritual bypassing as a weapon to keep people from being free? So releasing those unrealistic expectations, those toxic ideologies, and that internalized oppression. And as we do this, again, these are not steps. These are just things that I'm inviting us to do and to think about. As we do this, it becomes a portal, a pathway that helps us dream into a new future. It becomes a pathway that helps us reimagine a more free and just society. But you know, you need space to dream. You need some emotional free up to dream. You need to let go of some toxic ideologies to dream. So the invitation today is for us to think about how we pick one of these and begin to explore it in our own lives and in our community. How do I release? What are some unrealistic expectations? What are some toxic ideologies, even if I learned them, even if my pastor taught it to me, even if the bishop gave it to me? How do I begin to unlearn these things? How do I learn how to begin to connect with my own emotional capacity? Right? How do I do these things? And then last, because I think, help me, that we're going to do some Q&A. I want to make sure.
Yes, that's
Remember,
correct.
okay, good. So I'm wrapping up now, so we can do the Q&A. What must you, what must I, what must we remember together in order to imagine and live the freedom we all deserve, right? So let me go back. We know that remembering, some of the remembering framework, some things that need to be named because they were never named and they've been sitting on me for a long time. Some things that didn't happen to me, but it happened to you that I also need to name because it was unjust. What must we remember together? What ideologies do we need to let go of together? Here's one, and then I'm going to stop. Here's one. A lot of my work is with people from various faiths, no faith in terms of sort of a religious affiliation. Here's a release I invite you to. Sometimes we find it hard to join in community and work for justice with people who do not share the same faith as us. In other words, if they don't name Jesus, we don't let them into the party to do the work that we're trying to do, right? So for me, an internalized oppressive thought or a toxic ideology is that you must move through the world with the same faith as me in order to do the liberating and healing work that we're called to do in the world. I wonder if we might link hands with the atheists or the humanists or the Wiccan, or I wonder if we might link hands with people who think differently than us because we are leaning into liberation and justice and not trying to convert people to believe in a God or gods the way we do. So part of this remembering framework I invite us to is to really look at how our faith might hinder us from being free. We think our faith leads to freedom. But I want to suggest that for some of us, our faith is the very thing in the way of us being free and in the way of joining others in freedom. And so that's the invitation. What must we remember together in order to imagine and live the freedom we all deserve? About me, I'll stop sharing now and welcome any questions or thoughts. I hope I used the time well, and don't be mad at me about the questions I asked. But I do think I'm very challenged by how our faith gets in the way of us really leaning into liberation. And so that is something I would hope we take with us and play with a little bit. So I'm
Dr.
open to,
J,
yes.
Dr. J, you most certainly used your time well. And we first want to give you a sign of thanks by applause. And if you have any questions, we have mics on each side of the room. And if you're joining us online, please ask your question in the chat space and we will relay it to Dr. J.
Thank y'all for listening.
But you can go to the microphones in the room for those of you that are in the room if you have a question or you have a comment or you have a query.
I see a little bit of movement. Like I say,
Dr. Love is coming to the mic.
Thank you so much. I wish you were in this room so I could give you a huge hug. But when you were talking about, because I attend an African Methodist Episcopal church, and so when I'm in the sisterhood and we're talking and some other things, you know, it's all those words that you would say. It's like you God will get you through this. You too blessed to be strict. And I've always felt like I was being beat over the head with the Bible.
yes.
Seriously. And it's how then do we work towards, and you've given some really good examples, and I still need to absorb and to reflect. But even when we're in a religiously homogeneous group, how do we, especially an intergenerational group,
Yeah.
in the room,
Yeah.
how do we respectfully and artfully move through some of the things that you're talking about to get to that moment of liberation? Does that make sense?
It makes perfect sense. That's a great question. Yes, it makes perfect sense. So one, and I know y'all got answers too, right? So let me just acknowledge the shared wisdom in the space and online. One, we have to recognize that it took years for that particular ideology to have the space it has in our minds and in our institutions, right? So it's going to take time. So that I want to say that at the onset, because it takes time to shift how people have been socialized, right? So that's the first thing. It takes time. Second thing is, I think you heard me say, I didn't see a lot of my elders cry when I was growing up. And I know we had things to cry about sometimes. And that maybe they cried alone, but I feel like that there was this absence of perhaps emotional work that we could have done in community. But I'm grateful that my grandmother never cried in front of me. But today I get to reevaluate that. So in this, I'm saying honor. I'm always careful to honor the folks in the space, right? So I'll say something like, listen, I know what it takes or what it took to show up and to do this in this particular way, the way they did it, right? Or still do it. I'll name that and the power in that and some of the reasons behind that. And I'll also name, but one of the things I've learned is, do you know that has an impact on your body? Like when I learned that, I was blown. So now I get to bring in a few other truths about how emotional suppression impacts the heart, right? I get to bring some other truths into it, but I don't beat them over the head day one. I take my time and I engage in this kind of conversation over time. So what does that mean? This means that if the pastor and or other leaders are not on board with this, then it becomes harder to do. Why? Because we got to figure out how in our preaching, in our singing, in our Bible and book studies, in our ministry meetings, how do we begin to re-educate? Here's the Freedom School, because every chance I get, I now have to present other truths for you so that what you knew is no longer the thing that takes up the most space. So that's how I've been doing it. Again, it still takes time, but I honor what folks knew to do to get by, because there is something very powerful about the fact that they knew how to survive. Now, let's go a little deeper together so that we can experience new levels of freedom. So I hope that answered a little bit of it, but pastor, ministers, leadership have to be on board, because you also need to know that the sermon is not going to contradict the things that you're teaching in, say, in your Bible studies, or that your Bible study is not going to contradict the thing that's being spoken from the pulpit. So it has to be a church culture change work. And just, plugs, there are people like me throughout who come in and do 6 and 8 week and sometimes longer, just sort of work to help congregational leadership start to shift how they incorporate mental and emotional wellness with spiritual wellness to look at the whole person. So I hope I answered, but that was a great question. Thank you, Dr. Love.
The mics are still open.
And I'm just reading some of the comments while we wait for someone to come to the mic or type a question in the chat. I want to say some of my students showed up too. So I told them they didn't have to come, but I saw their names. And so I just want to acknowledge that some of my students in pastoral care, pastoral theology came to class.
So mine is not a question. I just wanted to thank you for using grief as the framework for all the stuff that's going on in the world right now. I've been walking around feeling like the entire country was mentally ill. And I see it everywhere. I feel it in myself. I see it in my children. I see it in my grandchildren. And I see that people are not behaving or feeling what I would call normal. And by normal, I just mean the way it used to be back when we still had institutions and we still had something that felt human.
Yeah.
And I haven't, it's disturbing, of course, but I haven't thought of it in terms of grief. But thinking of it now in terms of grief and that whole process of grieving just makes me able to sort of think about it and feel about it in a very different way. And I just appreciate that. So thank you for that.
Thank you. Thank you for naming that. Yeah. And I'll say this as we wait for another question, because the world is changing around us, right? That when you look around, you're like, this doesn't feel, and all of the people in your home and in your schools are also navigating some kind of loss and disruption. And so, yeah, thank you for seeing that. And when you start to see it differently, your heart does open up, I think, a bit differently. And then that's an invitation for us to figure out what we can do together so that we can all get free. Thank you so much.
I appreciate you naming working across boundaries, like interfaith boundaries is something that's really vital to like making real change in the world. And that got me thinking about the people with whom we share a religious tradition, but perhaps not the same moral judgments and things like that. And that, of course, is something that's happening very much right now with this Charlie Kirk shooting over the weekend. Both sides are taking it as a reason to hate the other side even more. So I was wondering if you had any comments about, how to work across that impossible seeming boundary right now.
Yeah, that's such a, and I was trying to that's a great question. So one, I want to say that there are some ways around faith that we share a name, but we don't share history or ideology. And so we have to really be careful around this fact. There are hundreds of Christianities, right? There's no one, there are probably more, probably thousands, but so one, recognizing just that it is different across the board. And I don't know that if justice is the lens through which, for me, our faith is built, and if our faith is not always leaning into what is the just thing, then I think we need to reevaluate. I'm not going to say anything about any particular side. I will say that part of our grief is that we have used this banner as Christianity to think that we had things in common, and what people, this is assumptive grief, right? This is assumption. An assumption is if we use the same title to describe our faith, then we move through the world in the same way. That even if we don't believe all of the things together, the fundamental things we believe are the same. And what we are learning today, not just today, but today, is that banner of Christian, that banner of whatever faith tradition we lean into, does not make the person next to me the same as me. And so regardless of that banner, to me, what links us is whether or not we are leaning into justice. I would rather work with, I mean, I say rather, I am happy, and maybe it is rather, I am happy to join in work with my my Islamic siblings, my atheist and humanist siblings, because what we're putting as the banner is justice. And too many of us, the grief that we're holding is we have been very comfortable, just like sort of thoughts and prayers. We've been very comfortable with this banner of Christianity, without recognizing that everything under that banner was not the same. And so some of our grief is grieving this identity that we thought we shared, but now you know for certain that you do not share. So then it's, well, am I still Christian? Are they Christian? What about my identity now? So there's a lot of grief that comes from recognizing that there might be polarizing sides that force you to sit down and really examine for yourself, who are you? What is your faith? And if we're all leaning toward justice, does the banner that you have above you around whatever your faith tradition is really matter, right? Ideologically, if you don't believe that all people should be free, I don't care what you call yourself. Right? So I don't know if I'm answering your question, but I hope I gave at least a little something in there. I don't have an expectation that everyone who wears the banner or wears a banner that says Christian is indeed justice seeking and leaning, right? I don't have that assumption anymore, because what I see is there are too many ways that we wear that banner and have different ideologies around what it means. I'm listening for words like justice and empathy and compassion and action. Those are the words I'm listening for.
You have another question?
Yes.
Thank you. Thank you so much for your words, for your wisdom. Reading your words and listening to you reminds me of when I learned about the concept of paradigm shifting in graduate school, and what a relief it was and how much sense it made to me when I learned it, because it was obvious how needed it felt. And
Yeah.
I'm reminded of that in listening to you and reading your words, and I really like your images. Some of the images you have are so beautiful. Thank you for them. So my question is a little obnoxious, but it's one of those, when are you going to come out with your book questions? And
That's a great
the
question.
reason I want the book is because I want to be able to talk about your work and what I'm learning from you tonight with other people. And I want to say that your work also reminds me of this woman named Esther Armah and her book, Emotional Justice. And I saw her, oh, you have her book?
I do, but it's probably on the other shelf. Yes,
well,
I do.
I saw her present in Tulsa in 2023 at the White Privilege Conference, and she blew me away, and you're blowing me away. And I'm thinking, oh, these two women, I wonder if they've gotten together. So I just wanted to tell you that I wondered that. And I so like your wisdom and words. It makes a lot of sense to me, and I'm applying it to friends that I have and myself. And thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. That book is absolutely wonderful. I have that book, and she's on my list of people that I would love to sort of be in conversation with. So you said it. I'm believing that others are hearing it in the atmosphere. Y'all see how I'm a little dramatic too. So y'all, certainly y'all see that too. And 2026. So I'm in the final editing stages. I sent it in, they send it back and say, hey, think about this, but we're in the final editing stages. And so 2026, that book about remembering will be on the shelves. And so don't worry, I'm going to make sure I let every school know, get this book. So thank you. I certainly appreciate your kind words.
Dr. J, our community in the chat space has been speaking quite frequently throughout your presentation, and they wanted me to share with the people that are in this space some of their thoughts that they have about your presentation. So I'm going to do that. And then you do have a question also online.
Okay.
Someone said, thank you so very much. You have helped me to see grief in a new and helpful way. Someone else said, I'm just grateful to hear these thoughtful responses to the great collective grief we are all navigating. Thank you for the ideas, the guidance, the encouragement you offer. Thank you so much. This is wonderful. I was a hospice chaplain, and this is deeper. This is so much good information. It takes time to process and then to decide on a productive group action.
Yes.
Then this is something that you also might want to riff off of. Until you named the various ways, types of grieving, I was not consciously aware that potentially we are grieving something every day.
And you want me to riff off it now? And you want to keep going?
I know you remember it, but I want to also give you the questions while I have it up here. Someone else said this was so powerful and this helped me today. Okay, here's the question. Are there any practical steps you would recommend to someone who is trying to introduce the idea of interfaith partnership to your church community who are very hesitant?
Yes. Okay, I'm going to go with the first one and I'll go with the second one. I know who the second one is.
Go for it.
Wonderful. So yes, from the moment we take our first breath to our last breath, we are navigating losses, changes, transitions, unmet expectations, unrealized dreams, and shattered assumptions. So grief is a life partner. We have been socialized to see grief as the enemy, as something that comes and is only about sadness. Grief, this internal process, this internal power that I believe the universe, creation has given you, all of us have. We are always navigating a change. When your child finishes high school and goes off to college, if that's the route they take, you're very excited, but that is also a change. When you've been single and you get married, your life has changed. Now, you might be happy that you're married, but it is still different from the life you had before, when maybe you could just go as you please. You didn't have to say, honey, you hungry too? I'm going away for the weekend. You could just, right? So this idea of grief as a life companion, which is why we befriend grief. We become her friend because she can help us. She talks to us and says, okay, so you're not single anymore. Let's figure out what you become now that you are in this new partnership, because you are becoming someone new after every loss and change and transition. You are always in this process of becoming. So I'm glad you noticed that. That is exactly what I'm hoping people see, is that grief is always there. She's always there. She's just not your enemy, right? She's always there. And if we lean into her and we let her speak, we become alive. I am alive because I allow myself to grieve. I dream because I allow myself to grieve. Grief says there's another possibility out there. I know you painted a static picture of your life. Grief says, get your eraser out. You're gonna have to make some changes because there are more possibilities. So yes, to whoever asked that question or made that comment, yep, we are likely in this grieving process through it's a partner in our life. So let's make her our friend. And then to the question around practical steps to introduce some of this interfaith partnership, right? So this is when we have to start thinking about big ideas, right? So instead of saying, let's go out and pray with these other congregations, we're going to go do a prayer walk. we might talk about what is the thing our community needs, right? So maybe that's a community garden. So now, instead of talking about faith for a moment, we talk about what it means to have affordable, accessible, clean grocery stores, gardens in the community. So we may have to start with a thing, right? To mobilize around. Because now you got, Masjid 36 and Beulah Baptist Church supporting a community garden, right? And that's an interfaith partnership. We didn't talk about we're going to come together to pray. We didn't talk about any of that right now. Right now, we're talking about people are hungry and we want to make sure that they have clean, accessible, affordable groceries. Start with something your community needs and build around that. So we don't always need to talk the faith talk, right? And then this second piece, may I say this? Christians, stop thinking everything is about you, right? We create interfaith spaces, but it still has a very Christian leaning in many cases, right? We read from a Christian text. We pray in the name of Jesus. Like, can you read from the Quran during your interfaith space? Can someone come up and interfaith, if we're going to start doing that, means it's not Christian centered. So for Christians, it seems to be a little harder. This is my experience for interfaith because we center Christianity and want to build a circle around it. I'm saying find it, the thing, and build everybody around solving that thing. So, Amari, I hope I answered your question, sir.
Can we give our speaker another hand?
Thank you all. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate you. And even though, again, I know you can't see me looking at you, I keep looking at the screen to look at you. I appreciate you so much. And I'm glad that you were able to join us for a second time. And I hope that this is not the last time that we see you. I am thankful for everyone that gathered with us here tonight. I want to point out to you, in case you did not see, there's a table at the back as you exit that has all of our degree programs and offerings from Iliff School of Theology. And I invite you to take a look because there's some really amazing stuff that we're doing here that we'd love for you to be a part of. You're already a part of the community. Come learn with us in other ways, if you would. I have a benediction for you this evening from a book called Black Liturgies. Go in freedom with tear-stained cheeks and stability of heart. Feel deeply and honestly without being consumed. And may God hold fast to you if the tide of despair strengthens its pull, that you could grieve with the gravity you deserve. Amen and Ashe.
Ashe. Good night, all.